The ethanol effect on beef quality, presented by Janzen. I'm here representing our company Circle 5 Beef Inc., which is located at Henderson, Nebraska. We have feed yards at Henderson and at Fairmont, right in the heart of corn growing country in Nebraska. We're 60 miles west of Lincoln. One of the things that we've been working with over the last several years is ethanol byproducts. This yard started in 1972. It was a cooperative venture with my dad and uncle and 3 other farmer feeders in the area. And the yards at Henderson and Fairmont are very typical of feed yards that you see in the eastern half of Nebraska. We farm, have cow-calf, and stocker some cattle on grass and corn stalks, and then finish cattle in the same locations. We market approximately 35,000 head of animals out of our yards each year, and of those 35,000, 30 to 40% of those marketings are done on a grade and yield basis for value-added programs. We've worked with value-added programs from all of the major packers in our area: Cargill, Swift, Tyson. We have quite a bit of feeding experience with wet distillers grains. Currently, if you draw a 35-mile radius around our feed yards, there are 6 operating ethanol plants. There's 3 more that are at some level of construction, so we're looking at an opportunity to have 9 plants within 35 miles. Those 9 plants will utilize about 300 million bushels of corn annually. That will put what has been a very high corn exporting area into corn deficit by nearly 100 million bushels. We began using the wet distillers grains in 1995 and have used them at some level or another since that time. We started out with rations containing 10 to 15% of the dry matter as wet distillers grains, primarily for protein supplementation and ration conditioning. The added value of fat from these products was also something we were looking for. Had the normal concerns at that time of higher moisture rations. What would it do to dressing percentages, our dry matter consumption, and overall feed efficiencies? When we started with these rations, we saw all of those aspects improve, and so we liked the use of that product in our diets. Since then, we've fed primarily levels of 25 to 40% wet distillers grains. For those of you on a dry matter basis, for those of you in a feed yard operation, that runs in levels from 40 to approximately 60% as fed. We use these higher levels as an energy from corn replacement and do it when pricing warrants. As a rule of thumb, I use those products, or optimize the use or maximize the use of those products when the product pricing is 90% the value of corn on a dry matter basis delivered to the feed yard. With an increasing number of ethanol plants, the availability of corn in our area is becoming an issue. This last summer in our Fairmont yard, I ran into a situation where we weren't able to buy corn from our normal suppliers, as a new ethanol plant that had moved in right across the road had bought up a good portion of the corn that was being stored for summer. We decided we wanted to see what levels of distillers we could feed and if we could actually finish cattle on rations that were completely made up of byproducts. We did economically finish 2 pens of cattle on a level of 70% of the dry matter, or 85% as fed through the summer. If you look at that wet distillers grains effect on quality grade, as we've seen presented here today, we haven't seen any negative effect from using wet distillers grains in our rations, especially when we look at those rations that have stayed in that 25 to 40% range. One thing that I would point out, the last 3 years on our grade and yield cattle, I can identify the week that the plants increased their speed and went to 6 days of kill. This would be shortening chill times and probably temperatures of loins at the grader. Our carcass grading did drop more than what the plant average dropped by a considerable amount. We saw about a 20% drop in quality grade that rebounded rather quickly, but I think it opens up some areas for research as to what we saw and what we're seeing, and is that fat in the marbling is visible when we speed up these plants and lower those chill times. Our grading on our cattle that have been sold on a grade and yield basis through the through the end of September for 2007 on 9,688 carcasses was 72% average choice or better. These cattle were finished on approximately 39% wet distillers grains rations, and this level would be comparable with our previous 5-year average. Again, we don't have a control, so that number really doesn't say anything, but it does show that cattle can grade at a respectable level fit these higher levels of wet distillers grains. If you look at the future uses of wet distillers grains, especially in areas where these plants are becoming more and more prevalent, those areas being historical corn exporting areas, becoming corn deficit, I think we'll use more of the wet distillers grains products for finishing cattle. This is often looked at the advent of the ethanol industry and its competition for grain with cattle from a negative perspective, and I'd like to take a look at it from that glass half full, and what are some positives about the industry moving into these areas. One thing we compete with is pork and poultry as a primary center of the plate protein source. We saw earlier that beef demands a considerably higher price because of its quality and taste aspects. If we look at the ability to produce beef on a cheaper level or cheaper cost of gain level, wet distillers grains I think can do that, and we were able to finish cattle on rations that were nearly 100% byproduct, and I think that's a very positive for our industry to look at producing high quality, highly desirable protein from byproducts from other industries. Sure gives us a good solid future as we look at competing with pork and poultry. Another thing I think that will be important is the ability to stockpile or store wet distillers grains during summer surplus periods to be used throughout the year. We looked at making piles in our bunkers this summer, and were successfully able to store a little over 9,000 tons of those products. I think eventually additional research needs to be done to optimize those feeding levels and making sure that we maintain, as in everything, the old adage of above all do no harm is a very important one that we need to keep in mind, that we don't compromise the high quality aspects that beef has. To look at some of that stockpiling and storage of product, we utilized our regular feed trucks and feed wagons to mix corn stalks and wet distillers grains, or straw and wet distillers grains, and pack it into a bunker. The university has done some research in that area as well, and here are some different feed ingredients and the percentages that are needed to be mixed together with wet distillers grains in order to either bag it in an ag bag situation or pack it into a bunker. We used a level of wheat straw at 15% on a dry or on an as-fed basis. This slide will show in that 13 to 17% for coarse roughage, and we found that to work well. And you can see that you're able to pack product, and we made a nice pile of product. Here's a university pile that they packed and maintained quality and fed that 3 to 6 months after it was put into this bunker. The product can also be bagged. And one thing you have to look at is mixing with some roughage in order to maintain bag quality, or getting a very heavy mill plastic bag if you're going to pack the product into bags by itself. Again, wet distillers grains is something that from a practical standpoint, feeders in those areas where these plants are coming in will have to be able to use and optimize its use. The information presented here, I think, gives us some ideas as far as what we can do for future research, and also some ways that we can utilize that product better. Thank you.